something that might reframe how you think about business development. Your referral network is only as powerful as how actively you tend to it. Most consultants treat referrals like the weather. They either happen or they don't. But my guest today has been running a stable consulting practice for 16 years. By treating his network like a living, breathing business asset that he actively cultivates. Monthly value-add emails, regular check-ins with past clients, face-to-face conversations at industry events, not a 5,000-person LinkedIn network, a carefully tended group of people who know his work, trust his judgment, and refer him when the time is right. And that's just the start of what he's going to share today. My name is AJ Riedel. This is Thriving Through, the podcast where each week I have real conversations with self-employed consultants about what it really takes to build a profitable, fulfilling, and sustainable consulting practice. My guest today is Chris Ellis. For over 35 years, Chris has served hundreds of organizations and thousands of clients worldwide as an executive, consultant, advisor, coach, and mentor. He serves clients of all ages, stages, and roles with an emphasis on middle management and senior executive development in professional services, health services, and technology services. Chris is a past senior leader and managing partner of a global professional services firm. He's also a board member and advisor, university educator, local and national speaker, and published author. And today he runs his own consulting and coaching business. Chris has a genuine contrarian view about where organizations are getting it wrong when it comes to developing their people. And it has big implications for every consultant who works in the organizational development and leadership space. He's also refreshingly candid about the real challenges of running a solo practice, the pipeline anxiety, the business development hustle, and the ongoing quest to scale beyond trading time for money. Chris, welcome to Thriving Through. Welcome, Chris Ellis. Welcome to the Thriving Through podcast.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be here, AJ. A pleasure.
Well, I'm delighted to have you. I like to start with a question that's related to the title of the podcast. The title is Thriving Through. So my warm-up question for you, what does thriving mean to you?
For me, thriving means having as much impact on my clients as possible. So the way that I measure thriving or flourishing or success is that the work that I'm doing with my clients is leading to impact for them in their role, with their teams, with their organizations. And along with that, I think my other couple of dimensions to thriving would be that I'm doing work that I love to do and helping my clients realize that impact, and that I have just the right sort of balance and volume of work as an individual, running my own practice, where it's not too little and it's not too much.
Okay. Yep. A good balance.
That's right.
What was your path to becoming a self-employed consultant?
So my path started with joining a firm right out of undergraduate, where I spent 20 years as a management consultant, starting out at the associate level, and then progressing over the years, and spending 20 just invaluable years at an excellent management consulting firm where we had clients around North America and around the world, and learning the discipline and the formula for great consulting. And as you might imagine, early on, I spent a lot of time kind of in the guts of organizations, working with teams and people who were delivering the work. And then naturally over time, which I think is true in a lot of firms, progressed into, working with managers and general managers and then leaders, and the scope of the work evolves and expands. Where your work is at in terms of the hierarchy evolves. And by the end of my tenure at the firm, I was a managing partner, an office leader, a region leader, client relationship manager, serving many different kinds of clients at the upper levels of the organization. And naturally, what happened is that in doing the management consulting work, which was highly project based, I also started doing a lot of coaching work that started sort of informally. And this goes back a ways. This was before coaching as a formal thing became a thing, where leaders and executives would ask me as we developed relationships through the project work to help them with certain things individually, as a leader, as a manager, as an executive. And so the coaching work just naturally evolved from the consulting work. And after I left the firm, um, for lifestyle sort of reasons and started my own practice, it was I was ready as coaching was kind of taking off to continue doing both consulting and coaching work as part of my individual practice, my personal practice. And and then I also added contract executive work to that because one of the benefits of being at the firm and having the experience that I had is that I was also an executive myself. And so was able to start doing some contract executive work as it came up with my clients when there was a need.
Okay. I had another follow-up question from that. So you made the decision to go out on your own for lifestyle reasons, meaning you didn't want to work 80 hours a week. If I'm kind of reading between the lines, is there a little bit of that?
There was some of that, yes. I would say you're not too far off. Between the travel and the actual client work, it was probably 70 to 80 hours a week for a lot of years. But because of our business model, in serving multiple clients at any given point in time, as a client relationship manager and engagement manager and leader of client teams, I could easily be serving four, five, six clients at any given point in time. It wasn't just one client where we were immersed in the client. It was a different model than that. So because of that model, I was traveling 46, 47, 48 weeks a year, 3 to 4 to 5 days a week. And it was a lot. And so it was time for me, with young kids at home and starting a family and some of the things that go along with that, plus my own health and lifestyle and well-being, it was time for me to leave that personal professional, um, model and start something more manageable for me at that time.
What has been, I want to, that was 16 years ago. I want to move to right to the present. What is
Yes.
the biggest challenge you're navigating in your business right now? And it may not be the obvious stuff, the thing that's actually taking up headspace. What's
The
the
thing that
biggest
takes up,
challenge?
yeah, so the thing that takes up headspace for me and this has been, I think, pretty true throughout my this second chapter of in my career in terms of having my own practice and doing this work as an individual practitioner. Um, the main challenge is, um, finding new clients and, um, being able to sort of be out there in the landscape where there's so much choice, so many different options, individuals, small firms, large firms, academics, hobbyists, entrepreneurs, whomever, gurus, repackagers, how to kind of, get some mind share with prospects and new clients with such a busy landscape of people that do this kind of work, while at the same time dealing with the sea change of first social media, professional social media like LinkedIn, and now, of course, artificial intelligence, and kind of how you build a practice when there are so many people out there who are really good packagers or repackagers and marketers, who are able to, you know, just do very well at having 5,000 people on their LinkedIn network, for example, when I have
Hmm.
500, and sort of, carve out my practice in this busy landscape that consulting and coaching is in. And I will say that what's been one of the things that's been helpful to me is being able becoming much more clear in terms of my own value proposition and my own focus as a consultant and as a coach. But I still, to this day, get the vast majority of my clients, and I know that we're going to go here next probably, through referrals than any sort of kind of outreach from a marketing standpoint. That seems, in my experience, to be relegated to people that are better at that than I am, and they've somehow found a way to kind of find the right formula. Um, that's never been part of my story.
Which then makes you completely dependent on referrals, which you have a good referral network, so that's a plus, but referrals are a passive form of lead gen because it's if they when they remember to refer you, you don't have any control over how many leads you get in any given month.
It's a great point. It is, I think, at its core passive, but I think one of the things that those of us who utilize the referral model primarily is that we can make it more active. And there are a couple ways that I do that. One is by just being open with my clients about the fact that my firm, my practice is referral driven, and that I would really appreciate and value referrals that they might be able to provide. Another active way is to stay in touch with my alumni network, people that, maybe I'm not serving today,
Mhm.
but have served in the past, and staying in touch with them and keeping some relationships fresh, not all, but definitely staying in touch and communicating. And then, where possible, maybe not through so much sort of like social media or professional media marketing, but more, meeting people in associations, um, going to events, and doing some face-to-face, networking, is another form of active referral in my
Mhm.
book. It's maybe not the conventional definition, but just getting to know people and building relationships. And even if I don't serve them, they can still become a referral source.
Right. So tell me a little bit more. You called it an alumni network. Do you have a kind of a formal system for keeping in touch with people? Do you send them a newsletter? Do you send them an email at a certain amount of time? How do you make that work for you?
Yeah, so it's somewhat of a system, but I keep it pretty simple. What I do is I send out a monthly, it's not really a newsletter, it's a monthly topic. that I think would be of value to the majority of the people in the quote network. The network is informal. There is, if you ask them, would say, are you part of an alumni network for Chris Ellis? They'd say, hmm, what do you mean? So that's sort of my terminology. But
Hmm.
every month they get something of value that represents the work that I'm doing, the things that I'm learning, insights that I'm gaining from my clients, and so on. And I get some pretty favorable, positive feedback on that. Um, the other thing that I do is I post all the time on LinkedIn, and people in my network see that. And once again, they see the values, they see the work that I'm doing. And then there are those that I'll every now and then reach out to in an email and just connect via email. And then a subset of those I'll try to have coffee with or spend some time with, maybe a couple of times a year, just to keep the relationship fresh.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Because when I think of, I love your insight into that. When I think of a referral network, I think of it as kind of passive, but you're kind of working your list. You know, the
Yeah,
people
yeah, there's
yeah, the people you have
exactly.
relationships with, you're continuing to
Yeah,
nurture those.
connections, relationships, and I wouldn't say that I'm, world class at this, but I do make an effort to stay connected, to stay top of mind for them. Uh, but most importantly, and this is one of the first things that I learned at the firm that I was at in business development, is to always add value and to always be interested in what's going on with them, to always seek to understand what their issues are, and again, to always add value. And in many cases, that formula might not compel them to be interested in pursuing some work together, but they remember that approach. And they remember that it's not a hard sell. They remember that it's not a pitch. They remember that, I'm uh, a sort of personal, professional business partner first, before I'm just a consultant coach that's out there trying to drum up business. And that's always been my goal in terms of these connections, these contacts, my network, which has always been quality over quantity. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not a 5,000 LinkedIn network guy, I'm a 500. But what I've noticed over the years, and especially when I was at the firm, is that there were business developers in the firm that were quantity focused, and there were business developers and managing partners in the firm that were quality focused, and both can result in a robust consulting and coaching practice. One isn't necessarily better than the other.
But it's kind of a little bit of personality. I mean, I personally would argue that quality over quantity is going to get you further long term than the short term, you know.
It very well may. I mean, you know, one of the things that's mystified me over the years is how you make the jump from having your own practice to building a firm. And I think I know kind of how one does that. By the way, I don't think it's done individually. I think it's done with two or three other people, first and foremost. I do think it's also done through some quantity-based marketing, but it's also done through the scale of the work that you're doing, where, the resourcing, and the staff that you need to actually deliver the work requires more than just a couple of people. So I'm digressing there a little bit, but um, I think you're right. For me, using sort of this quality focused approach has has brought me a relatively stable practice, but not necessarily one that I would call high growth. But it's been stable. And I say stable, and that's a different term than predictable.
Okay.
So one of my laws, I call it the law of activity, is that as long as I'm consistent in terms of how I deliver my work, how I communicate about it, how I reach out to my network, how I engage with them, how I share, as I mentioned earlier, the insights, the value, those things. As long as I keep doing that consistently, the work will come. What's unpredictable is when, from where, and by whom. But it typically happens. It almost
So
always happens.
does that mean that so you have a bit of a feast or famine? That you still have different levels of income monthly?
I don't have feast or famine. What I have is a pipeline of revenue that, I'd rather my pipeline of rather revenue be, you know, 6 to 9 to 12 months when it's usually, probably more like 3 to 4 months pipeline of target revenue. I'd like to get it to 6. But then again, when I was, running a firm, we didn't have a pipeline beyond 3 or 4 months, even at the firm level, and we were very successful because the work that I do, and the work that we did at the firm is not recurring work. It's project-driven work. And even coaching work, which can be renewed. And I've had clients for 2 or 3 or 4 years that I continue that with continuous coaching relationship. Even that is not a pure recurring subscription, you know, sign on the dotted line and you're a client for 5 or 6 or 7 years. So
Mhm.
when you're in non-recurring work, which is so, pretty common, I think, in management consulting and coaching, um, you're going to have some fluctuation. But the key is to have a pipeline of revenue based on clients you're serving and clients that are, at the top of the business development funnel or moving through the business development funnel, that when you probability adjust that revenue with the revenue that you have booked, you've got you've got a period of sort of consistent revenue in front of you. And sometimes I get close to that 3 or 4 month, and it's like, oh boy, am I going to hit something here? But as I mentioned, usually things fall into place through referrals and contacts and connections that bring me back to that 3 to 4 months of revenue. Again, it typically happens.
Okay. But your goal would be to have 6 plus months.
It would be nice.
Maybe not a goal, but a
I mean, and I do get that when I do contract executive work, right? So there are times, when I'll sign on as a COO or a CEO, and or a head of operations or something like that, and you sign on for 6 months or 9 months, and sometimes it's open ended, but you've got in those situations as a fractional, you can keep doing your consulting and coaching work, but also have the stable revenue as a contract leader.
right. So how do you juggle? So you've got the contract, executive contract work, you've
Yep.
got consulting that's project based, and then you have coaching. How do
Yes.
you keep the balls in the air? That's a lot of different business. I mean, those are all kind of fundamentally different businesses in a way. How do you keep the
In,
balls in the air?
in a way they are. And, you know, I might not completely understand what you mean by balls in the air, but one of the things that's differentiating about my approach is that I do a consulting and coaching hybrid model. So now there are times when I have a specific consulting project. For example, um, one of a wealth management firm has been a longstanding client of mine, and I do coaching work for them and consulting work. where the consulting work is project driven. For example, last year we did a Vision 2030 project where the management team and I did some I think really good, interesting vision work about where the firm wanted to be by 2030. So that had a beginning and an end. It had a set of deliverables, it had work steps, it had a project plan, and so on. At the same time, I was coaching some of the people in the organization, including the founder, CEO, which was kind of ongoing. And those two can really enhance each other. Um, and and so in that sense, it's hybrid. But even in the coaching work, with let's just stick with this one client, with this wealth management firm, even in the coaching work with the CEO, we tackle what we might call traditional consulting problems. Like for example, one of the things that as part of coaching her and talking about the evolving nature of her role, given their 2030 vision, we also landed on, well, what about the difference between the management team and the executive committee for the firm? Do we have role clarity there as we're thinking about your evolving role? Do we have clarity around these two groups? So as part of the coaching work, we kind of set aside a little mini consulting project to do some clarification around these two different teams. So I don't know how different that is from other coaches, but my coaching has a broad span to it. We sometimes get into personal work life issues. Which always starts with a professional coaching set of needs and problems.
Mhm.
And then sometimes we get into some broader organizational consulting issues that we address as well. So it's very much a hybrid model. And how do I keep the balls in the air? Well, my model has some self-limiting aspects to it. Like I so at any given point in time, I am probably coaching between 10 and 15 people. I have 1 to 3 kind of conventional consulting assignments. And then every 2 or 3 years, I do contract executive um, function. So just because of the nature of my model, it's sort of self-limiting in that I don't have a runaway, like I'm not coaching 30, 40, 50 people. And I know there are coaches that do that. I don't know how they do that. I don't know how a coach can do 6, 7, 8 coaching sessions a day. It just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't work for me either.
Well, we'll
Yeah,
see who joins.
yeah.
Yeah.
My limit,
Variable
my limit is four
theoretically,
to five meetings a day
are
because I
available,
like to do
and
work between meetings
yeah,
and do prep work and do other
the
things.
scheduling this
So I
is
try to limit. Sometimes I go to 6, but at any given day I'll have maybe, 2 or 3 coaching meetings and then 2 or 3 consulting type meetings.
Ritter messaged me and said joining as soon as 4
But it's a little limiting in terms of scaling
Yes.
because you're trading time for money.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
which is,
Yep.
yeah. Is that
Very, very,
something, is
very
that,
limiting.
is that something that you are concerned about or that you want to, work on for the future is figuring out how to scale beyond the trading time for money model?
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. So,
Okay,
what I've
perfect. I have like
developed
19
is something I call the Management Accelerator Program. And
so it's
the
just us
Management
looking
Accelerator
at
Program is
morning.
something
No
that
one's actually getting that apart.
I would like to
It's
start
like
using
they're
more
more
and
this
more
special, so
with
they keep working on
clients
it. So if anyone wants to
um,
join it, Ritter does.
as a kind of
River's really
an A to Z management development program. And I think there's some I
Oh
think
yeah,
there's some
and it's
scaling there,
already.
but there certainly is some recurring revenue there that I'd like to move into. And I've tried
Okay.
different ways in which to do that. I even had an online platform, but there's just too many of them out there. And there's too many things that are free and master class this and master class that. And of course, AI now is fundamentally changing the curation of best practices and access to, what people think are proven and best practices, but we could debate that for the rest of the time we have together, which we won't. So the competitiveness out there for mind share is almost impossible to start your own platform unless you're a brilliant marketer, which I'm not, as I've said more than once today. So I do have this material that I've created, which represents 35 years of experience, learning, insight, things that I know that work, client experiences. Over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, I'd like to find the right way to do what you're referring to, AJ, which is to find some ways to utilize that material that isn't purely time for money.
Makes sense. And I'll tell you, as somebody who works with self-employed consultants, it is doable. It is
Well,
doable.
we'll have to talk more about that.
Yes, we'll talk offline about that.
We'll talk more about that. Now I will say, I just want to throw one other thing in here. I don't really do time for money, even in my time for money model. So what I do is with almost all of my clients, I fix price the work. And because I don't want to get into kind of, if someone calls me in the evening, if they are wondering if I'm going to charge them for this SOS call because something happened in their organization that day. Basically, what I do is scope out the work and put a fixed price on it, and then tell them, look, within reason, I am always available. So call me, text me, and we'll just kind of do it that way. I don't do time for money anymore in its pure sense.
Right. And when I bet time for money in that your project fee is still based on the amount of time that you put into it.
An
So
estimate. An estimate.
Yeah,
That's
right.
exactly right.
And after 16 years, you're probably pretty good at estimating so that you're not, you're not losing or ending up spending way more time than you had originally allocated.
That's exactly right. I'm pretty good at that. But at the same time, as an individual practitioner, I don't lose any sleep over whether I've gone over my estimated hours for a client. When I was running a firm, it was like, you build for, every 15-30 minute slot, and you recorded all your time and you did the pre-billing worksheet and you sent out the invoice, and it was definitely, a different format that I use. And it just takes a lot of unnecessary dynamics out of takes a lot of unnecessary dynamics out of the relationship, in my experience.
Right. Yeah. And it strikes me that the relationship is more important than whether you estimated 40 hours and you're at 42 or 43.
Yeah.
You're not going to come back to them in nickel and dime and say, well,
No,
I
absolutely
estimated
not.
this. Yeah. But that being
Absolutely not.
said, how do you handle scope creep, where you have a very clear proposal that they've agreed to, and then
Yeah.
they come back and want you to do stuff that very clearly is beyond the scope of the project? How do you handle that?
So that's always part of the initial agreement, is that we've, scoping out the work, being very clear about the objectives, the desired outcomes, the deliverables, the steps, not overstructuring it, but just being clear about it. And, just being very upfront with my clients about, hey, if we think there's a scope change that's emerging here, we're going to talk about it and decide if it requires a change in the fees associated with the work. And we'll just keep the conversation open for that if it emerges that way.
Okay. But you're not afraid to have that conversation, which You know,
Absolutely
I,
not.
I see with early stage consultants is that even having that conversation can be difficult, can feel uncomfortable, let's say.
Well, and I think one of the reasons for that you touched on already, AJ, which I think was a good insight, and that is um, if you come at this from this career uh, from the standpoint of the relationship is the most important thing. And then secondly, the value that you bring and the impact that you have. Um, and then thirdly, the engagement and the connection that you're making. These conversations are easy. If you come at this from, I got to figure out a way to bill 15 hours at 350 bucks an hour or else, then that makes these conversations hard.
Right, right. And those that kind of mindset is probably not going to be in business in 16 or 20 or 25 years because that mindset of, I'm strictly in it for the money, clients can feel that. They know that.
I thought you were going to say weeks or months. You said years, but
Well, you're
I
a long
so
termer. I mean,
I'm in agreement.
yeah, you've been at this a long time. I've got you beat though, because I was a self-employed consultant for 35 years. So you have a ways to
Well,
go. But then you were in management consulting for 20 years. I was in corporate for 10 years before I made the leap.
okay, okay, yep.
So I have an imagine use your imagination. If you
Uh-oh.
could wave a magic wand and fix one thing about how your business generates new clients, what would it be?
I'm always wanting to try to be more effective at striking a chord with, organizations and leaders that are maybe in my network or I've just met, or, um, being very compelling in terms of why they might need, my services, why we might want to work together. I guess you could say I'm in the kind of the eternal quest of defining and clarifying my value proposition. Um, and I don't think I'll ever crack the code on it because I'm a generalist, and I know that you and I have talked about this a little bit that makes it especially hard in
Hmm.
some ways when you're not a specialist. I'm a generalist, and my mission is to help organizations become better at management. And that's a big, broad term, but it's a very big deal, and not enough attention is paid to management, and too much attention is paid to leadership. And too much emphasis is given to the top of the house, and not enough emphasis is made or given to the middle of the house.
Tell
And
me what you
so,
mean by that. Top of the house and middle of the house.
so one of the main problems that I see in organizations is that the executive leadership teams um, believe that too much of organizational success is based on them, and
Mm.
too little organizational success is based on the level below them or the two levels below them. And I'll probably get some nasty emails from some of my clients if they see this, and that's okay. But and also we've become enamored with leadership, this thing called leadership development. And we've become enamored with this thing called executive. I'm an executive coach. Um, I work at the C-suite. We hear that so often as if it's kind of a badge of honor or something. And I do work at that level all the time. But my passion is 2 or 3 levels down, where the work actually gets managed, where the engine of the enterprise actually exists. And so if I'm on this, going back to your question, I'm on this quest to try to resonate more and more with organizations, with leaders, with buyers of consulting and coaching services, that your emphasis really needs to be at the senior manager level, the director level, maybe the senior director level, and large organizations might include the VP level, that's where the investment in development needs to be. And if you look at the best organizations in the world, the ones that are consistently successful, I will guarantee you that 95% of the time, they have the most capable management group for their industry or their cohort of comparative organizations. In other words, leading organizations prioritize and invest in management development so that they can consistently execute very well, because they understand that that's where execution comes from. So my goal is to be able to do a better and better job of articulating this to more organizations so they wake up to it.
I love it. So, and by extension, so if I'm kind of interpreting this right, this also means that kind of the old model of C-suite executive coaching, leadership development, that's where the company's money was going. And what you're saying is that the company's money, yeah, that's good, but it's really got to happen at sort of the upper middle management level
That's it.
to have that strong management that's going to drive the revenue, the achievement of the goals of the organization.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
where execution happens. You know, uh, at the top of the house, what do we get? We get direction. We get guidance. Sometimes we get inspiration. Um, but where do we actually get the real execution? Where do we actually get like you said, the driving of the performance goals and the 3 things that every organization needs, which is synergy, quality, and productivity, in order to be very successful over the long term. That happens 2 or 3 levels below the leadership. And your point's very well taken. At the executive level, at the top of the house, let's call it the C-suite, when we look at how much attention is paid in a lot of organizations to leadership development, on kind of an executive coaching on kind of a per capita investment, it's nowhere near what it's way beyond what you see down into the guts of the organization, is what I guess what I'm trying to
Right.
say.
Right. So if they spend
Maybe
a
we should
hundred
flip
dollars at
flop
the
that.
C-suite,
Yeah,
they're spending $1
there
at
you
the
go.
mid-level. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Maybe we
Sounds
should
like
flip
we
the
should.
model.
Right.
Yeah,
Sounds like you've got a nice contrarian position to communicate in your messaging.
I'm trying. That's that's what I'm working on. And the good news is I don't have to serve everyone. It's not like I've got a firm of 500 people that I need to feed.
Exactly. Yes.
So,
Yes. Well, as we start to near the end of the podcast, I have a
yes.
couple closing questions. I call them the rapid fire closing questions. What is one book, podcast, or resource that's been invaluable to your consulting practice?
Wow, what a great question. Um, I would say that one of the books that I would recommend would be The Pause Principle by Kevin Cashman. I hope I'm getting his name right. I'm looking at it. I think I've got that right. Yeah. And another one would be Scaling Up, which was the precursor to Traction. Um, but it's a much better way to think about organizational scaling and growth and the leadership and management that goes with it. I'm trying to think of management. actual management resources that I've drawn from, and I'll be a little egotistical and say that I leverage my own
Yeah,
management
good.
accelerator program, which is the MAP, and
Hmm.
I'm leveraging my own resource all the time because I can't remember everything I've learned for the last 35 plus years, but I access it all the time in terms of my outreach, my networking, my marketing, and my client service delivery. It's my number one resource is my own program.
Right. You've written the handbook.
For me, yeah, I mean, I know there are books that have been written on management and leadership. There's thousands. But to kind of create something yourself and then utilize it is pretty cool.
Yes, absolutely. I had another question that I forgot to ask earlier. You talked about leadership training and management. What is the difference between leadership and management?
Yeah, so leadership can happen at any level. Okay, let's get that clear. When we think of leadership, we typically think of executive level leadership, but leadership can happen at any level, and leadership is about um, you know, inspiring, encouraging, and empowering people to do their best work in meaningful ways. And the guiding trait of great leaders, in my experience, is what I might call intentional coherence. They're very coherent about, and this is especially true at the top of the house at the executive leadership level. They're very good at telling the story
Mm.
and creating the burning platform and communicating the strategy and connecting the dots and those kinds of things. That coherence is what I and those things that I just described relate to what I might call executive leadership. Management, on the other hand, is also about empowering, but it's also about directing and guiding, empowering, supporting, and sort of being in the day-to-day mix, but sort of managing the dynamics in that day-to-day mix. And it's a more active, closer to the tarmac, um, you know, kind of activity. Uh, but it includes leadership. Leadership is a part of management, but management is very specific to the people that manage work or manage processes or manage a program or manage a function um, or even manage projects. So that's where management kind of comes in. I think that's probably easier to define than this esoteric thing called leadership.
Okay. At the C-suite, aren't they managing their next direct reports as well?
Well, I don't think you manage people.
Oh,
Um,
it's
I think
okay.
you, I think you manage. Now they might. I think we could make a case that to some extent they're managing a function, but I think they're more leading a function in the
Okay.
C-suite than they are managing a function. I think the management of the function, whether it's operations or marketing or information technology or, you know, client services or whatever it might be, I think the management of that function actually happens below that level.
Okay. So the key skills for a leader of C-suite is leadership. At the next couple levels, it's leadership and management.
Yeah, it's a little bit different scope of leadership, but leadership is absolutely part of it. Still need to be encouraging, still need to be empowering, still need to be able to articulate direction and priority. Um, it's even more difficult at the management level because oftentimes they're articulating stuff that they didn't create, right? It's easier to articulate those things if you're in the rooms, like senior leaders are. Um, but yes, there's a leadership component to managers in the middle part of the enterprise. But there's a lot of other things that that leaders at the top of a house don't have to
Oh,
do.
yes.
Now,
Once tell
here's
them
my
to
experience. My experience is the best senior leaders were first very good managers. Okay. And the best managers were first very good
Yes,
professionals and collaborators. So, this is another reason why management development is so
well, I mean,
important,
he is a principal.
is that
That's
the,
fine.
the more you
It's
invest
like, okay,
in your, again, managers, senior managers, and directors, the more you're creating the future leadership structure for the organization. And so that's, of course, goes back to talent management, talent development, succession planning, and those kinds of things. But I don't know if I helped or just muddled the question that you asked, AJ. But
No,
um,
you helped. You helped. And I think your premise is that management needs to be developed. I mean, we don't, when you're promoted into a management level, that doesn't make you a good manager by definition.
most managers fail within 2 years.
Oh, okay.
They either leave the role or they leave the organization, or they just stay in the role and continue to fail and are miserable. So most managers fail. Why? Because the best professionals were advanced into management roles, and there isn't enough formal development to help them be successful in that new management role.
They know how to be a professional really well. They don't know how to be a manager to move up to the next level.
They might know aspects of it, but they need more development and support and coaching and investment to really hit their stride at that level, because it's an incredibly difficult level in most organizations to be successful in.
Yeah, I can well imagine. Well, this has been wonderful. I have one final question, and it is the
Yes.
most important question.
Okay.
How can listeners connect with you if they want to learn more about you and your work?
Well, thank you for asking. I think the best way to do it would be to connect with me via LinkedIn and send me your email, because I'd love to communicate by email and put you on my list when I share kind of my once or twice a month content related stuff. So I think LinkedIn is the best, and it's Chris Ellis Consulting and Coaching.
Okay,
So would love to hear from people that way.
perfect. And I will make sure that we have the link in the show notes. So for
Thank you
those of
so
you
much,
listening
AJ.
or watching, it'll be easy to get Chris. Chris, thank you for being my guest today.
Well, thank
And
you. It's been great.
and for all of you listening and watching, until next time, keep thriving through. This has been such a rich conversation with Chris. I thank Chris for being so candid about the real work of building and sustaining a consulting practice, and for sharing a perspective on organizational development that I think a lot of listeners haven't heard framed quite this way before. I want to pull out a few things that I think are worth sitting with. First, the idea that referrals can be an active strategy, not just a passive hope. Chris's three-part approach: telling clients directly that his practice is referral driven, staying in touch with what he calls his alumni network through consistent value add communication, and showing up face to face at events, is something every consultant can start doing tomorrow. Second, his law of activity. Law of activity. Stay consistent in how you deliver, communicate, and show up for your network, and the work will come. What's unpredictable is the when and the where, not the whether. WHETHER. Third, the management development argument. If you work with organizations, this is worth exploring as a positioning angle. The professional development and leadership development investment is going to the C-suite. The execution gap is in the middle. That's a compelling case to make. You can connect with Chris on LinkedIn. The link is in the show notes. Until next time, keep thriving through.